Hi everyone, this is Athena from Courage Coaching. If you are new to my channel, welcome. The content on my channel primarily focuses on narcissistic abuse and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. In my coaching, I specifically offer one-to-one coaching for those of you who struggle with recovering from narcissistic abuse. And I myself have been in recovery from narcissistic abuse for a long time. I've done a lot of work on myself and I know how difficult this journey can be. I have a lot of knowledge and insight because of this recovery journey, and now I help people recover by supporting them, by encouraging self-compassion, and by helping them heal the inner critic and their inner child. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the 4 different trauma types, but I'm specifically going to focus on the hybrids. So we do have 4 different trauma types: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. These were all mentioned in Pete Walker's amazing book, PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. And he mentions all the different hybrids, which he has come across in his therapy with clients. Now, if you don't know this book, I will have a link in the description of this video for you to click on it. This book has helped a huge amount of survivors, so please check it out. So, like I mentioned before, we've got 4 different trauma types. We got fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So those who are repeatedly traumatized in their childhoods tend to overuse one type of trauma response, one of the 4 Fs. These trauma responses are maladaptive, so they are not healthy. I just want to quickly break down the 4 major trauma types, and then once I break down the 4 trauma types, I'm going to talk about the different hybrids and what they are all about. And this should help you understand a little bit more about what recovery looks like if you have one of these trauma types. So the fight trauma type is probably the most toxic. This trauma type is the one that is narcissistic. So the one that is entitled, controlling, manipulative, sociopathic. And of course, these all are on a spectrum from mild to extreme. The flight trauma response is somebody who is obsessive, compulsive, who is a worrier, who is very panicky, who is very ADHD, who could possibly be an adrenaline junkie, who maybe suffers from bipolar disorder, the person who's a busyholic, a micromanager, somebody who is overly driven and can also be perfectionistic. Now, the freeze response, the freeze trauma response, is somebody who is dissociative, who loves isolating and hiding from the world, who likes being a hermit, who is very achievement phobic and is sort of a couch potato. They enjoy just hiding at home and just sitting on the sofa all day and not doing anything. Lastly, we have the fawn trauma response, which is our typical people pleaser, codependent, the one that has no boundaries, which is very passive and isn't able to say no to people. The fawn type is the parentified child and is usually the person that ends up in domestically abusive relationships. Okay. So most of us will have one primary trauma response, but usually if our first trauma response fails us in some way, we will then have a backup trauma response. So we're going to go into the different hybrids now. I'm going to start with the 2 fight hybrids. When the word fight is at the beginning of the hybrid, this means that this is more narcissistic, more toxic. So we have the fight fawn hybrid and we have the fight freeze hybrid. In the fight fawn hybrid, we usually see the following. There is narcissism and entitlement at the core of this hybrid. These types usually split or fluctuate between a fight response, a fight defense, and a fawn defense, which is a bit strange because one is narcissistic and one is codependent or caretaking. But this actually happens. The problem with the fight fawn, however, is that any caretaking response is coercive and manipulative, and it's usually very self-serving. Whenever you do see a fight fawn do something that looks like they are trying to look after you, this usually means that they are doing it because they have an agenda, because they want something from you. The fight fawn type doesn't take responsibility when they cause harm. They generally project imperfections onto others. And even when they are fawning, you usually can see that there is no real empathy or emotion in the caring that they are showing you. So it's all very superficial. The next one is the fight-freeze hybrid. And in this type of hybrid trauma type, we see the following. This is usually an extremely passive narcissist who demands that things always go his way. This type of narcissist essentially has no social life. They do not like social interactions, which is why they are also a freeze trauma type. They have very foul moods. They do not like talking to people. They do not treat their family members well. They're always moaning and groaning. If they ever sit at the dinner table with their wife and children, nobody's allowed to speak. So they are almost impossible to live with. And most fight-freeze types end up being completely on their own because their family members have had enough of them. And most of these relationships usually end up in divorce. It is a very untreatable type of hybrid. So both fight fawn and fight freeze hybrids are more toxic, more narcissistic. Next, we move on to the flight freeze hybrid. And in this hybrid, we see the following. This type of person prefers isolation, and this is something that you mostly see in men. These trauma types avoid intimate relationships. They prefer to isolate, and they don't want to be re-traumatized, so they avoid getting close to anybody. They don't like intimacy, or they are scared of intimacy, and they usually work themselves to exhaustion. And these are the types which you will usually see working on a computer. They are big technology nerds or gaming addicts, and they're also very prone to becoming porn addicts because of the fact that they don't get close to other people in a romantic way. The next hybrid type I'm going to talk about is the fawn-freeze hybrid, which is the classic scapegoat that we see in a family. These types are the most passive, and they have suffered the worst rejection in their childhood when they were toddlers. Whenever they tried to assert themselves, they were severely abused, severely punished. And these types usually end up in very abusive relationships, very abusive partnerships, and they suffer from an extreme form of learned helplessness. They are so helpless, and they cannot get out of the mindset that everything is their fault. And they don't usually realize that they are being abused when they are in an abusive relationship. These types usually find it very hard to help themselves. Even in therapy, they find it hard to accept that whatever happened to them wasn't their fault. Now, we then have two more, which is the fawn flight hybrid and the fawn fight hybrid. Now, the fawn flight hybrid is the super nurse. This trauma type is compulsively working to death in their family to look after everybody else's needs and completely neglects their own needs. They avoid their own maybe childhood trauma, their own pain, by constantly staying busy, by constantly looking after others. They are compulsive caretakers. They can become compulsive cleanaholics. They are very perfectionistic in the way they do things, and they expect other people to do things their way. And they tend to overburden others with unsolicited advice, and they don't like it when others reject that advice. And they sort of see themselves as a super nurse, somebody who's constantly out there looking after everybody, a bit like a Mother Teresa type. But this is obviously not healthy because they fail to actually take a moment to breathe and actually look after their own needs. Lastly, we have the fawn fight type. Now, this is not the same as the fight fawn, which I mentioned at the beginning of the video. The fawn fight is very similar to the mother or caretaker who smothers her children. These types try to help others too much, even if the others do not want their help. So they will constantly smother others and tell them that they know best and that they know how to look after them best. And if the others refuse, they get very upset. If they are in flashback mode when they are looking after others, they can actually be quite manipulative in their caretaking. However, this type of hybrid is a very relational type of hybrid, so they very much want an intimate relationship, a loving relationship. And unfortunately, a lot of fawn fight hybrids develop love addiction, especially if they aren't able to actually form a healthy relationship. So they will always fantasize the potential of a loving partner that they may have one day, and they get stuck in this sort of love addiction mode where they're constantly fantasizing about this. And those are the different hybrids of the trauma types. Now, if you found any of these useful, if you could see yourself in any of these hybrid trauma types, then please feel free to leave a comment below the video. And that is the end of the video. Thank you so much for listening and for watching. And I will see you very, very soon. Take care. Bye.